Jolly good. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this April 22 Cabinet meeting. Can I start by asking if we have any apologies for absence? I think we're fielding a full team, aren't we, today? Thank you. Does any Cabinet member have any declarations of interest on any items on the agenda? No, thank you. Now, I have two sets of minutes here. One is from the 28th of February and one is from the 8th of March. I think that's as a result of having done the specific Land at Six Fields meeting. I hope that every member's had a chance to have a look at those minutes. Can I ask to either minutes, are there any suggestions for amendments or corrections at all?
I propose they be agreed, Chair.
Thank you, Phil. Is that agreed? Thank you very much. Takes us on to Chair's announcement. This evening I have no announcements. Not aware of any urgent business that's been raised. Consequently, let's go on to our first main item, which this evening is the West Northamptonshire Enhanced Partnership. This is with Phil, Councillor Larratt. And Phil, you may be aware, following your short introduction, we've then got four speakers in the following order: Councillor Emma Roberts, Councillor Nigel Hinch, Councillor Jonathan Harris and Councillor Wendy Randall. So Phil, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. This report is an update on key developments affecting West Northamptonshire's bus services. The government's national bus strategy, Bus Back Better, required the council to develop a bus service improvement plan and an enhanced partnership in order to be able to access future funding for bus services. This report seeks an agreement for the enhanced partnership plan between the council and local bus operators and the arrangements for reimbursing bus operators for concessionary travel in 2022-23. This is all about working with bus operators on commercially viable routes. It is not with regard to subsidised routes, which will be a matter that we will be looking at going forward between now and September, and bringing back proposals as to how we proceed with those services at that time. The bus service improvement plan was considered by Cabinet last October. And at the time we submitted a bid for funding for the authority. And can I just draw your attention to paragraph 6.5, where it says at the time of the writing of the report we didn't know the outcome of that bid. Well, I'm sorry to say that we now do know the outcome of that bid, and we weren't awarded anything, I'm afraid. I'm afraid it seems that all the funding has gone to the big major cities such as Stoke-on-Trent, Greater Manchester, West Yorkshire, West Midlands, Liverpool City region, North East and North Tyne combined authorities, Warrington, Portsmouth and a few others, although one or two smaller areas were successful, such as Luton and York. But unfortunately, as I say, we weren't successful. We have asked DfT for feedback as to why that was the case. Obviously, once we get that feedback, we will consider how we go forward with our bids in the future. I don't know, perhaps we weren't as ambitious as we might have been, perhaps we weren't as innovative in thinking of some different schemes. But anyway, we'll find out what it was and we will come back and we will look at what we can do to be more successful in future rounds, because there is future money available. And I would particularly want us to look at how we deal with young people going forward, because I'm very mindful of the fact that young people find it difficult to access social activities, as well as work and education. So I do think that we perhaps need some consideration for them in future proposals. But as I say, we considered the plan last October, and since then work has been undertaken on the enhanced partnership plan, which is before you tonight, and we've done that in conjunction with local bus operators. These documents have been subject to consultation with operators and wider stakeholders, and form a legally binding agreement between the council and operators with actions ascribed to all parties. Moving on to the issue of concessionary fares, the report proposes that the council agrees to reimburse bus operators for concessionary travel at 100% of pre-COVID levels until the 30th of September, and then at 90% until the 31st of March. And that is in accordance with government guidance, although it does keep changing, Chairman. One of the ways we can mitigate any reduction in bus services is to have more people travel on public transport. Therefore, it's also proposed within the report that funding should be allocated to work with operators to market bus travel across West Northamptonshire. And as I was saying, over the coming months, the council will work with operators to design financially sustainable and passenger-focused network that takes account of our residents' changing travel patterns post-pandemic. But also on top of that, as I say, Mr. Chairman, although it's not on the agenda tonight, subsidised routes will be coming back in September. Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. I know we were disappointed in the results of the bus improvement plan, and thank you to all the work done in officer time and indeed the member time, such as yourself and Councillor Hinch is here, who made a contribution, of course. Shall we move on to our speakers on this item? As I mentioned earlier, our first speaker is Councillor Roberts. Emma, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, is it on?
You're on, yeah.
Okay.
You go, Chair.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report, Councillor Larratt. Councillor Holland-Delamere and Councillor Stone wanted to be here this evening. Unfortunately, they've both got other engagements, so hopefully I will encompass what both of them wish to say, as well as myself on the point. Clearly, loads of work has gone on, and I think having the working party group that you've got set up has been absolutely essential, given that you've only really got one officer at the moment, being able to focus on that. I understand why this report's needed, so I'm not about to critique the content of it particularly, because I understand why it's needed. I think this, unlike the original report, it's an item that you've got to deal with and you have to process. But I think Councillor Larratt's right with regards to why the funding wasn't received. I think generally the feedback for those who haven't received it is that there was not enough imagination and there was not enough ambition or vision within those applications, and that's why they didn't receive it. Similar authorities to us have received it, so it's really disappointing that we've not been part of that game. This is something that we've really got to do. We've got to have some vision and imagination, and we've got to think outside the box. We've got to be a little bit more adventurous. We need to consider possibly concessionary tickets for all under 18s. We need to consider different types of tickets that will allow those in poverty to travel whenever they need to. I can see that we've had an email just earlier on today with details of some new price plans from Stagecoach, which may or may not have an impact. We will have to wait and see. Countries such as Germany and Switzerland have all invested in their public transport system. We've got Manchester currently bringing buses back into public ownership. We can do that. Why can't we be really ambitious and consider that process? We have to look at this enhanced partnership as part of our wider travel infrastructure, though, and that's a real concern for me that we're still not doing that. I've said this before, that a lot of the reports that come forward to Cabinet and to Council are on their own, they're silos, they're not working in conjunction with other areas, and I still don't feel that the departments are doing that. And until we do that and we look at the wider travel infrastructure as a real issue for us, and until we're more ambitious on our whole travel infrastructure, then I don't think we're going to reach the sustainability we need. And I note that Councillor Larratt's bringing this report back again with further information later on in the year. And I hope that perhaps we might see some wider conversation around infrastructure, sustainability, active travel, because the only way we're going to get people to use public transport is if they stop using cars. And if they continue to only have an incentive to use a car and don't feel that public transport, or indeed walking or cycling, is safe or viable for them to do, then we're not going to reach the ambition and imagination that we need. So hopefully we will see some more progress in the further reports. But I would urge us to look at this as a wider infrastructure. As I said at the beginning, you've had to do this report. You had to put forward the bus strategy. Let's the next report be because we want to. There's a real political will to deal with it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Emma. Anybody want to ask any questions while Emma's still with us, or we move on to our next speaker, Phil? Or do you want to save comments up for all speakers?
Oh, I'll just say a few words. Yes, hell of a lot of work has gone on into this by only one officer, and not only has that officer been doing this West Northants, they've also been doing North Northants. So a hell of a lot of pressure on one particular person, and I recognise that and what have you. What has gone on and what's discussions and everything, this has been to the cross-party working party, so it has been through the political mill in that respect. But I do agree we need to perhaps have more ambition and imagination, depending on what we find out as to why we weren't successful. And only 31 of the 70 people who submitted actually got any funding. So we're in the majority, if you like, but I'd much rather on this occasion be in the minority. And I think you're absolutely right. Ticketing is something we need to look at, and that refers to what I was saying earlier, particularly with regard to young people.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Emma. Next speaker, Councillor Hinch. Nigel, welcome.
Thanks, Chair. Whilst it's extremely disappointing that the WNC bid to the Department of Transport for the BSIP was not agreed, and as Councillor Larratt's just said, only 31 of the 70 plans that were submitted actually got funding. Our close neighbour of Milton Keynes didn't get funding, and I would have said they are the innovator in transport solutions. So maybe it's not too bad in terms of why we didn't get something. What I don't like, though, is the suggestion that's going around that the funding request didn't show sufficient ambition, and all it's doing is rubbing salt into the wound. Ambition has got to be where we could get to in the timescales. The timescales for this are 3 years. Could we totally revolutionise what we're trying to do in West Northants in 3 years? The answer is no. So I don't think we lacked ambition because we couldn't do it in the timescale. So we spent 12 months developing the plan, the partnership agreement, the schemes, consulted with various operators. That work isn't redundant. I believe that the enhanced partnerships that were submitted were heavily caveated, that they needed Department of Transport funding to be enacted. Without the funding, then, clearly these commitments can't be met. It's said that the enhanced partnership arrangements have to remain in place as other funding may be made available. So councils are being told this is not a final no, and while they can't make any promises, we should not give up hope of getting funding. It is possible that further BSIP funding will become available in the coming months. Other funding, such as round 2 of the Levelling Up Fund, we should be looking to get an application in for that, and the deadline is the 6th of July, so resources need to be pulled together to put together a bid for it. But all of this for West Northants needs to be looked at in 2 parts, the urban and the rural. And the big issue that we're faced with is the rural. You can ride around Northampton as much as you like and see plenty of buses, but across all of our rural areas, there is insufficient transport. So I strongly recommend to Cabinet that due to our BSIP not being received, that we do take up that feedback from the Department of Transport, the working group engaged, and councils kept informed of what that feedback is. If it is just lacks ambition, then I would ignore it. Our rural communities are the worst hit with a lack of public transport, and doing what we've always done won't address the problem. We can't keep subsidising large passenger vehicles to travel around nearly empty, burning fuel, adding to congestion and polluting the environment. I endorse the EP, but I also request that our priority of connected communities needs to be more than making plans and funding bids to improve bus service. We need a good, strong plan and actions taken and funding bids being submitted to government to try to improve our situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nigel. Again, Phil, did you want to comment?
Yeah, can I thank Nigel for his comments? I think we've all got ambition. I think it's the innovation that goes with it that we've got to work on in order to get what it is we want and develop the service that people want. I think going forward that I absolutely agree, urban, rural got to be looked at separately. Rural is a big problem. And I think we need some consultation fairly quickly so that when we're looking at what funds are available for subsidy, that we utilise those to best effect to enhance services for as many people as we possibly can. You mentioned a levelling up fund. I've already talked to Stuart about that, and we're actually getting something going on that. I totally agree with you. We mustn't give up hope. There is more money available. We've got to go for it and go for it big time. And as you rightly say, doing what we've always done isn't the answer. And I think that's what's reflected in the outcome of the bid. We've got to be really innovative and come up with something different.
I think one final comment on that is we don't want to know what people want. It's what they need. And the experience that I've had over the last 3 years is they'll say they want all sorts of things. The reality, when you deliver them something slightly different, probably fulfills the requirement 80, 90% of the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nigel. The next speaker, Councillor Harris. Jonathan, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick acknowledgement also to the officer who's been involved in the development of these plans, and a recognition that he's spread quite thinly between the two council areas, so I want that acknowledged. It is extremely disappointing that the bus service improvement plan was unsuccessful. And of course, the question I have representing a rural area is what does that mean for bus services that are currently subsidised? And I recognise this report isn't particularly about subsidised buses, but it is a question that exists and will be there for some time. And we do have timelines around that. There will be pressure, no doubt, from September onwards. So I think it's important that we can have some answers to that for the rural areas in as quick a time as we possibly can. I believe that something like £1.2 billion was allocated on the bus service improvement plan. 3 billion was originally promised, so I'm hoping that that actually does mean there is still money there for the future. And on that point, it's really good to hear that we are seeking feedback, because I think that's important that we close that loop from a learning point of view. We understand what we could do better. I think it's also important on a general point that we inform the public, that we keep them in the loop. We're very good as a council at going out and telling people that we're making bids for this and bids for that. But I think we should be open and transparent and honest and actually close the loop and let people know that we were unsuccessful, and that we are looking to the future to see what we can do differently or better. In regards to this particular report, I just want to mention a couple of specifics. The X7 is the bus that runs through quite a lot of my ward. We are now down to once an hour, which is supposedly temporary. But a reduction of, one bus an hour now instead of two is not enhanced in any shape or form. So I think, again, I think it's really important that we have some scrutiny and relationship with the operators to understand what that particular situation is, but I'm biased because it's my ward. Also, can I just please make a plea that we don't become too overly Northampton centric? On the enhanced plan, it talks about real-time displays. They would be valued in rural areas also for people to understand the timing of the routes. 7.3 of the report talks about the real importance of understanding roadwork activity. Last week, there were roadworks planned south of Madewell, which signs up notifications for quite a period of time, which led to buses being cancelled, local businesses actually not taking bookings. And then on the very day that the roadworks was supposed to occur, there weren't any. So we have a fundamental problem still, I think, between highways and communication there that needs resolving. Otherwise, that will be a problem for the future. In my own ward, we're running a community bus pilot very soon, which will reconnect two villages who've not had a bus service for some number of years. And I think I just want to make a comment about a person that's quoted who will be taking that service up. She said that it will change her life. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the importance of these types of services for people. My final point, very briefly, is the reference to 8.6 on climate. A number of councillors have mentioned it already. We have made a net zero declaration. Buses will fall under the council's scope in terms of emissions under the net zero rules. So we really do need to keep ensuring that we push for better buses, ideally electric fleets, as quickly as we can. That's my only comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Phil, did you want to comment?
Thank you, Chair. I hear what Jonathan says about the officer, and I recognise the work that's gone in. Yes, very disappointing. We're where we're at, and I think we quickly want answers, and we need to move ahead with what it is we're going to do in the rural areas in particular. Open and transparency, that's something I've always believed in, and if there's anything to tell you, I'll tell you. And I think you're absolutely right. We need to be open with the public. We've got regular communications with members, so I'm happy to include anything in that. Similarly with parish councils, happy to include anything in that. I hear what you say about specific services. I couldn't comment on those at the moment, but the issue of roadworks, that's the worrying thing, that there's still problems out there. I know we do regularly have emergency works taking place, as happened here only a little while ago. And you can't always cater for those, although you can do your best. It's very difficult for everybody when you've got a real emergency that arises and you end up with four-way traffic lights and everything goes pear-shaped. But getting that sorted is a key. And you talk about real-time display. I've seen some new innovations that have come out where you don't need a bus shelter for real-time display. So things are moving on. And perhaps where we haven't got bus shelters, we can actually sort of start going down that road and getting that information in there. But services are important to a lot of people, and but we've got, at the end of the day, a finite amount of money, and we've got to use that to ensure that we provide, we deliver for as many people as we can.
Thank you, Jonathan. Final speaker on this, Councillor Randall.
Thank you, Chairman. Funding for buses. On 6.1, it says that the bus operator decides where and when to run their services. That is a real big concern for me. Often the bus routes don't fit in with times of working, don't fit in with times of college. We have our local train station to Daventry is Long Buckby, 4 miles away. I had a look to see how often the buses are running, and it takes 1 hour, 50 minutes, because it goes all the way to Northampton train station first and then loops all the way back. which I thought was absolutely ridiculous. So, you know, if the bus operator is the one that decides where and when, you know, how can we have an impact in that? Just recently, they were going to cut the bus from Daventry to Banbury. Well, a lot of people pass Woodford. They use the Horton Hospital as their hospital. So, you know, people were really worried. They also use that bus to get to work. So Facebook was just crammed with people saying, I won't be able to get to work. I won't be able to get to hospital appointments. There were parents on there saying their children used that bus to get their children to school and college, and how were they going to manage? So, you know, so that is a big issue. I don't know what the answer is. Often when we do a consultation, things on the website, I've had elderly people come up to me lately to say that that they can't read the bus timetable, it no longer exists, or you know, it's been ripped off, or it's had graffiti on it. And when they've asked the bus, they just say, look on the website or look on the app. We haven't, I think in Daventry, there's 1 or 2 bus stops that have got an electronic signage on there. I think that they need to be on all of the stops, especially, you know, to alert people if a bus has been cancelled. So I don't know if there's any provision for that to be made available. And, you know, for me, it's all right, people responding to a consultation who don't use the bus, but we need to get hold of those people that do use the bus to find out, you know, when, you know, if they're going to cut a service, you know, what one is a service that is really essential to them. So that's basically all I want to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Wendy. Some comments, Phil, perhaps?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, a lot of the issues that Councillor Rams talked about are things that we can address through the bus partnership. And sitting down with operators in a formal environment where there's a commitment to work together, we can look at how services fit in for education and rail and things like that, as you absolutely say. So I look forward to the partnership, hopefully getting to grips with some of those issues we raise, and that we can move forward positively on that. If people are, you know, if people are being told to look on the website or look on the app, I don't think that's right, because there is a lot of people who aren't IT literate, and we must consider those. And again, coming back to timetables, again, something, the printing of those is something we can look at through the bus partnership with the bus companies to ensure that, you know, there are bus timetables produced and are printed, and that people can phone up for a bigger print one if they want one. So all these sorts of things we look, you know, I look forward to working through the partnership to see if we can address. And if you've got any more concerns, let us know and we'll put it on the agenda for the partnership.
Jolly good, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Any member of the Cabinet want to raise any comments? No, is that everything from you, Phil? Anything?
I'll just draw everybody's attention to recommendations in section 3 of the report and ask that Cabinet support them.
Thank you, Phil. Are those recommendations agreed? Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Takes us on to item 7, which is the anti-poverty strategy. This is with Matt. Introduction from Matt, following which we have 5 speakers in the following order: Councillor Emma Roberts, Councillor Rosie Humphreys, Councillor Sally Beardsworth, Councillor Bob Purser, and then Councillor Dennis Meredith. So first of all, Matt, over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. So I'm really quite pleased and proud that we've got this strategy before us today, because I think it's a real strong piece of work, and it's a credit to the direction that the council's heading in. And I think if we go back to the very early days of our administration, when we made a clear commitment in our strategy that we want to use the best in West Northants, whether it's the best people, the businesses, the organisations and the places, to drive better outcomes for the people that we're all here to represent. And also we've talked about our Live Your Best Life and the 10 tenets that we're becoming more familiar with, and this sits very strongly with them. And also there's the timing point around the publication of this strategy. I think never has there been a time more when we're talking in the news about things like energy prices, inflation and the cost of living. So this is something I think it's really pertinent, and the inequalities that we know about, certainly in parts of Northampton and some of the rural areas as well, that existed before the pandemic, and now seem to have been amplified and exacerbated because of it. And it's this strategy, I think, that's going to go a long way to really start to get underneath some of the drivers behind some of these inequalities, and we can demonstrate what we can start and do about it. So from the outset, I was very keen with this strategy that we put something in place that's not just going to go and sit on the shelf, that we can tick a box to say, that's our strategy, aren't we good? I really wanted to put something in place that we can hold ourselves accountable to each year. And I think we've agreed that we'll do that and annually get something to council, get something through the Health and Wellbeing Board, through Cabinet, that we can say, these are the measures that we've decided we want to tackle, and we've either been good enough or we're not doing enough. So, we don't want this to be something that's just going to sit there as a nicety. Also wanted it to be collaborative as well, because I know we've got a wealth of experience through members, both across party. We've had Bob and Emma on the working group with us, and Adam, and I know Sally's been along from the Lib Dems as well. So we've got a real wealth of experience that we need to bring in and harness. Also, there's the organisations that we know we've got in Northamptonshire, Voluntary Impact Northamptonshire, the Hope Centre, who do some great work, and they released their report recently on their view of the world in terms of poverty as well. So there's a whole collection of people and organisations that we needed to bring in, and I think to that end we've achieved that by the way they've contributed through the oversight group that we put in place. And we talked about how we're going to define poverty, and in the strategy we've talked about, we've adopted the Child Poverty Action Group definition and Joseph Roundtree Foundation definition of poverty. So it was important that we understood and had a sort of bar to say, this is what we understand poverty to be. Also, we commissioned something called the Poverty Truth Commission, sorry, that escaped me then, which other people who have done a similar exercise up and down the country have commissioned a Poverty Truth Commission, which goes away and talks to people that are actually living through the experience of poverty. Not that, it's not something that we want to put in place to say this is what we think poverty is, but we want to listen and go out and talk to people that are experiencing poverty from all walks of life. And again, we've done that, and that's a process that we're going to keep open throughout this, throughout the lifespan, if you like, of the anti-poverty strategy, because it's not something that's we're going to do, again, like I say, and just have on a shelf that's there. It's something that we're going to develop, and this is the start of it, and I think it provides a framework for us to drive it on and move forward with. If you look in the reports, it talks about a lot of the determinants and a lot of the experiences and different groups that are affected, whether that's single parents, people in work, people out of work. There's lots of areas that we understand and recognise that people experience poverty from. Also, going back to looking at what's out there up and down the country in terms of good practice. Through Stuart, we identified Salford as a place that have done a pretty good job. So basically, we've pinched the best parts of their strategy, and I think we've added to it. And hopefully, in my opinion, I think we've done a better job. We want to make sure that we're measuring ourselves against outputs and determinants, and doing something about them if we're frankly failing to address poverty. We've also, through the group, we set up 3 simple commitments. 1 is to support people who are in poverty now. 2 was to try and do what we can to prevent people from falling into poverty in the first place. And 3, to make sure we continue to try and influence government and national organisations about what poverty means to people in West Northamptonshire. Also, we talked about there's 32 commitments in the strategy that are going to form the bed of our sort of action plan. And it's those 32 determinants that we can start and develop data around and start and measure ourselves against. And if you look there's a pretty diagram towards the end that's got 9 measures, and there'll be the measures that we can put in front of us again at council next year and say, okay, are we delivering against these measures, and what are the determinants that sit underneath them? And they really do cut across all aspects of the council. I can look around the cabinet table now. Economic development is hugely important. Rebecca, and planning policy that's emerging, you know, how we develop and plan for better communities so we can try and you know, wean out poverty, fill bus connectivity, you know, the rural areas. It's huge. So youngsters can get to jobs, they can get to Northampton from Daventry or the areas that that has been mentioned earlier. Finance, of course, is huge. Adam, and housing, the housing strategy is huge for children's services, and the support we offer, and schools and educational outcomes. Mike, even you know, the way we process and do things in-house. We talk about reviewing the way we talk about we action debt, you know, how we chase council tax. All that has an impact on people's experiences and ultimately poverty, and David through community services. So everything we do is linked. And Dennis, I'm sure, is going to come and ask me, well, what are you going to do for my patch? And that's a very fair question, Dennis. But it's a shame that we had to cancel the all-member session on the ICS and the neighbourhood partnerships that we're starting to look at developing, because I can see very clearly how what we've got here will sit really well with those neighbourhood partnerships that we're developing. So we can really get underneath the data of what we're picking up from what's happening in Dennis's patch in Tavalira, or what's happening in rural Daventry district, or what's happening in other parts of Northampton. So we can really dig underneath, get a real grip of the data and what the issues are, and do something about it. And I'm really pleased that we're able to commit some money from the Public Health Reserve to really start an action based on evidence in the different areas. And we can't give an exact amount, but it is a really significant amount that we're talking about. So I'm really pleased that there's a real commitment from across the council. And like I say, I can really see how this fits in throughout the council, but sits also in a strategic way with the bigger picture stuff like the ICS, how it's going to feed into the Health and Wellbeing Board. And we can use that as a mechanism to hold all of us to account to make sure we're delivering. So I'll perhaps stop there, because I could carry on going all night. But, you know, I'm really pleased with this. It's something that I think we can all be proud of. And I've got to thank again all the members that contributed to the groups that came along. And last but not least, to Vicky Rockall for supporting us, for showing the commitment from her side while she's dealing with things like the Afghan stuff, now all the you know, the other issues that are happening around the world that are affecting us in Northamptonshire, so in West Northamptonshire. So a big thank you to Vicky Rockall, and recognise the work that she's put into this. And with that, Chair, I'll conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And we share your passion for this. It's an absolutely tremendous piece of work. It's something really important. And who would have known, when between us we agreed to do this some months ago, how desperately needed it was going to be, with the turn of events, the cost of living, and so on. So again, I'm grateful to all those members, cross-party, the officers who've been involved, the partners and the other groups and so on, to bring this so far as it is. And now we start getting on with it, don't we? Oh, and by the way, because we will reorganise that integrated care session for members, well, we will be doing that soon. That's really, really important, because as you rightly say, the localities model, which the integrated care will be taking, will be really, really important. And it's absolutely vital that we as members understand how it's shaping up and how we can get involved and be part of driving that. So look forward to getting that date through. Well, let's take some speakers now on this item. As I say, we have 5, and the first one is Councillor Roberts. So Emma, over to you. Yes, of course. Yep. Okay. Thanks. Thanks, Lizzie. Emma, over to you.
Thank you. Sorry, noisy nails. It's an excellent piece of work. When we embarked on this, it was a Labour group motion, and you'll recall that suggested that an anti-poverty strategy was essential. And when we embarked on the oversight group or the working group or whatever you wanted to call it at the beginning, I was really sceptical, because when I've been involved in cross-party groups before, inevitably their makeup usually means that the shared desires of that group are not necessarily the shared outcomes at the end. But I thought this was managed incredibly well. I thought voices were really heard and actions were taken on board wherever they came from whether that was a political spectrum or a community and voluntary sector partner. I want to thank Councillor Golby for that, because I think he really spearheaded that as part of the group, and I think he did actually really listen to what everybody had to say in the room, even if he didn't necessarily agree with its concept. He thought about it and processed it. And I want to specifically thank officers, because they were hugely important to doing that. They were also really receptive to the information. So Stuart's team and Vicky and everybody else who was involved in copious notes that had to be taken. And also the voluntary sector partners that were involved. I thought it was an incredible group. So I think that's something to be proud of. I would have liked to have seen a recommendation or a specific recommendation in the report that every cabinet and council report now has added to it an impact assessment on poverty to go along with the climate, community and equality impact assessments. That was a real desire from that oversight board. So I would have liked to have seen an additional recommendation in the report that we now do that this report, this strategy is now shared with every department, and every department has to say, are the decisions we are making aligned with our anti-poverty goals? And until that's done, this strategy really is just a springboard. That's not to say it's no good, because it is. I like it, love it a lot. But we've got to make sure that's done, so that if the decision we're making will make people poorer, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to mitigate that? Or even if we're going to make that decision at all. So, you can add a line to the recommendation if you like, but I'd really like to see that. Councillor Stone wanted me to specifically mention that the framework within the report, the performance framework, and just that there were some areas that she'd like to have considered: premature birth, stillbirth, incidence of miscarriage, low birth weights, poor neonatal outcomes, etc. They're all complex factors that can actually add to poverty. But as many of us who were on the group understood, we couldn't put everything into here. If we did, we'd have been there forever. But it's a building block for us to move on. We also, I couldn't speak without touching on the cost of living crisis. I'm sure you all follow Martin Lewis. Everyone seems to at the moment. He sees that, and he's saying at the moment that households will be going into absolute poverty. That essentially means heating the person, not the home. It means, as we all know, that personal food banks to donations are drying up because households who normally donate can't donate anymore. We're seeing staff that deliver debt advice, staff who help households maximise their income being laid off in the voluntary sector. So whilst we've got this strategy, there are some concerns, obviously, that the area that supports the people that are in poverty is being impacted by decisions that we make. Today, we also heard that those in work are again worse off, and real terms wages are less than this time last year, and that the average pay rise is 2.2% below inflation. Millions of pounds a year are given to businesses in council-owned contracts, and the living wage payment for those service providers has got to be a priority for us. It's mentioned within the strategy, but it really has got to become a priority for the area. Work should be a route out of poverty, and more than half of people at the moment now live in half of people in poverty at the moment, now live in a working family. Had some queries around the household hardship fund and whether or not we've got that being monitored at the moment, and whether or not we've got outreach staff talking to disadvantaged communities who are applying for that fund. I know Councillor Longley's mentioned it before, and whether or not we're putting any additional help into getting people to complete the forms that they need to complete. They're quite complex. Finally, I'm receiving lots of inquiries from people regarding how they access the vouchers offering that we recently made an announcement about. I've got lots of people who are saying they received the household support fund, but they've not received the vouchers. How do they get them? How do they apply? Just a bit of a plea, really. I get the need for press releases, and I get, we do them. I get it. But can can we really think before we release a headline grabbing £1 million, here's a load of money that we're supporting you with, without releasing the detail? Because within minutes of that going out, I had community and voluntary sector organisations contacting me saying, what on earth is happening? And how are people going to actually access this? And when I made an inquiry of officers about how people would access it, the press got the answer before I did, which is sad. So I'd really encourage that we have that information and we're briefed beforehand. It's more important that us as elected members are aware of that situation than it is that the press are. So just a plea to do that. It's a building block. It makes a commitment. Really proud of it. Thank you for everybody's input into it. And I know I've gone over, so appreciate you.
You double time, but you're normally so concise. And I think we replied to the press because it came via the press, didn't it? Or your inquiry was copied to the press or something like that. We'll address that. It may be a good point about the how. Sometimes the headline, the how is not always immediately in place, but no, it's a good point about the how. People need to read that.
Jonathan, I did give the inquiry to the press because they made an inquiry with me, but can I just say I still haven't had an answer? I've got the answer because it was released to them, but I still haven't had a personal response.
Yeah, okay. I think we felt it had been done through the press for other reasons, but we'll discuss then how we do that most effectively. I think it's a valid point. I've had a lot of inquiries over the carers bonus, incidentally, which the officer dealt with for us, but all the information has not been passed on that one through employers. So I do understand how people get concerned about things like that. Matt, there was a couple of points in there that you might want to reflect on or you might want to respond to.
Yeah, I think it's a valid point about the recommendation at the back of the report. And I'm sure we can look at finding a way of incorporating that moving forward. I'll have to check that that's something that we can do, but yeah, it's a very valid point. And Councillor Stone's points, I did see a note, and those, as you say, we could have carried on. We could still be sitting there now if we were going to include everything, but they are determinants and outcomes that, you know, I think we've still got some work to do on what we're going to measure and how we're going to measure it. But, you know, Councillor Cooper's here and she's our health inequalities champion. So that, you know, it all sits with that work across the whole spectrum of public health. And again, that point about how it all cuts across and fits with everything. But those are points that we can pick up and make sure we, if we need to, incorporate them and measure them. And household fund point as well. The officer, I understand, is Belinda Green, and through Stuart, I'll get a response to Councillor Stone's point.
I've got the answers now, but the point I was making was I should have got the answers in the press release or before. But I think few people nodded at me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. So our next speaker on this item is Councillor Beardsworth. Sally, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think a policy has ever been more needed as it is today. I think when we started the strategy, nobody would ever realise it would be in this predicament that we are in at the moment. And many, many people are fearful of their lives and how they're going to live them in future. I was reading today about the emergency price cap and why we're in this situation. And it just seems unbelievable that last year we had bills that were quite dear, but now people are getting bills. I was reading in the paper, a couple today said they don't know how they are going to afford to put the heating on ever again because their bills have gone up so astronomically. They've gone up from £110 a month to £295. That's a huge increase. Disabled people are worried about keeping warm to prevent them going to hospital with pneumonia and chest infections and things like that. How are we going to deal with this huge, huge problem? And I know I'm speaking to the converter because this is why we put the strategy in place, but we didn't realise that we were going down this road of absolute poverty. Saying today 263 million more people face poverty in the extreme. And that was from Oxfam. I just wished we can work on the strategy to get some more actions and outcomes from it. It's a good piece of work. It's a good starting point, but we've got to know how we channel that out into the general public. We recently had last week a meeting with Martin and a lady from Revs and Bends to talk about the hardship fund and how easily accessible that is to people. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't even know about it. So I've taken copies of the forms and the policies to Northampton Partnership Homes because their clients might often be in this difficult circumstances that they can't afford the heating. So, but we must get this information out. They are working on a new policy for the hardship fund to make it easy for people to get, and that will be much better for them. But I really, really do believe this strategy is a really good starting point, but we really now need to do some actions and some outcomes to take it forward, to see that we are actually helping the people in our area, because as I say, nobody should go to bed worried about whether they can have the heating on or they can have a meal, and a hot meal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sally. No, I think you're right that this shows clear intent, clear commitment and a collective view, doesn't it? But now the action goes on to deliver it. Everybody would agree with that, I think. Thank you. Matt, did you want to comment on any of the things that Sally's asked
No,
about?
just to totally agree. We need to demonstrate some actions and outputs, and that's exactly what we will do. Thank you.
Thank you. So our next speaker is Councillor Purser. Bob, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I too welcome the strategy. I wasn't part of the group. I've been various meetings around it, but wasn't there. So I'm interested and really welcome the strategy, and thank the members and the officers who put the work into it, because I think it's a really good piece of work, particularly the commitment for everyone to work together and to carry on working together. And also the part which says that we need to make representations to the people who do have influence over areas that this council doesn't have. And that does involve making representations to government. And I'm concerned that this strategy is like us rowing upstream through the washlands, and somebody open, and the fuel effect of the fuel increases is like somebody opening the sluice at Bedford Road and washing us all with the strategy over the sluice down at Billing. And I'm just really concerned of the effect of fuel poverty is going to have on poorer people in this town. And while some of us have been protected by what the Chancellor has done, actually the poorest tenth of our people have been most affected negatively by the increasing costs and the changes to the benefit system. So what I'm urging members of the Cabinet here now, I write to Andrew Lure quite regularly, don't often have a great deal of success, but I wonder whether this is an issue where members of this Cabinet can have some influence with our members of Parliament and with government cabinet ministers who can affect how we respond to this international crisis on fuel, so that by the autumn, people who are going to be driven into, I think, fearsome poverty, and I think we'll see all the worst things that happen when you have kind of loan sharks, people getting into debt, actually turning off the power, being put on the uneconomic, worse tariffs than they are at the moment. We really, what the Chancellor did in this budget was really not enough. And I would hope that all of you could make representations that we need to do much more before next winter in terms of the impact, particularly of fuel poverty and the increase in fuel costs before next winter. Otherwise, I think we're going to have a terrible problem.
Thank you, Bob. Matt, do you want to comment at all? Our MPs are aware of the work.
Yeah,
going on,
they
aren't
are, and we'll make sure, well, this will be put in front of all of them, and we'll ask them to advocate for the people that they represent in the same way we have put this together for the people that, you know, of all of West Northamptonshire. So it's important that they hear that. So we'll be making that very clear, Bob, and maybe as a part of the action this time next year, we can say this is what we've done, and these are the people that we've engaged. But certainly we'll be making sure that we'll be asking them to be that advocate. Thank you.
Because their own inboxes are full of mail on this subject, people in difficult situations as well, of course. Thank you, Bob. And the final speaker on this item is Councillor Meredith. Oh, I beg your pardon. How did I do that? Councillor Humphreys, I'm so sorry. Rosie, should we take you next? I beg your pardon.
Thank you. I also very much welcome this strategy and echo Councillor Beardsworth's observation that it's needed more than ever at present in these appalling times we're living in. I particularly welcome its commitment to keep investing in free advice agencies, given that our local citizens advice and community law service do such a fantastic job. And it's certainly a very good starting point, but high-level ambition statements have to be matched by demonstrable outcomes, and we look forward to seeing those outcomes. In the case studies, I felt it was perhaps telling that there was no example of a rural resident, say living in a small village on a low income, or perhaps a pensioner, no transport, no GP surgery, no shop, no amenities. Councillor Hinch was referring to transport being regarded as both in terms of separately rural and town. And I do ask the question whether there should be a particular focus on rural exclusion. So as I say, no case study in that. I do wonder how the oversight group and the Poverty Truth Commission did engage with the rural communities in the process of the strategy. I'd be interested in Councillor Gulby's comments on that, because as we know, the indices of multiple declaration, they may be what the strategy calls established methodological framework, but they don't accurately reflect what's going on in rural areas, because they for example, in a small village with, say, large houses and a section of poor quality social housing, for example, grouped all together, that doesn't look too bad, but it won't identify those pockets of deprivation. So that's something I'd be interested on Councillor Gulby's comments on. The statistic in the strategy on fuel poverty, which is on all our minds, of course, it goes back to 2019, 11.8%, 15,192 households. It's got to be far greater than that. So I wondered if there's any more updated figure that would be more meaningful to include in the strategy. And there's mention of inequitable fuel tariffs, but there are no mention of the challenges to rural residents who are totally reliant on oil fuel, and they're facing a 92% fuel increase. So, you know, I think it's no exaggeration that without, well, probably government intervention, let alone something West Northampton Council could do, that there are going to be far more deaths from hypothermia this winter, unless something is urgently done, quite frankly. I heard today of a lone parent in full-time work with the children who had to be given a grant from the community to get an emergency delivery of oil, because there was no means of support from WNC in the last provision of Household Support Fund. The Winter Fuel Bank payments were only were applicable to those on prepayment meters, but no other type of fuel, contrary to the government guidance, which said any type of fuel, including oil. I did bring that to Councillor Brown's attention, and I think it was going to be reviewed, which was pleasing to hear. But I'd be interested to know if there's going to be any change of direction in that to include rural users of oil in the next administration of the Household Support Fund. Which brings me to one of the your first priority on addressing poverty in the strategy is supporting those in need. Again, I think the Household Support Fund, the Winter Fuel Bank, needs to be inclusive of rural of oil users. I'd be interested to know if the council has information on how many households do use oil solely. I think it's 1.5 million in the UK, but many of our rural villages are off the grid. Yeah, it's already been referred to, the administration of the Household Support Fund and the Council Tax Fund are not easy to access. In particular, the Council Tax Hardship Fund, which there was the total funding for that, the total pot was 425,000, and we spent 33,000 in the last financial year, and that really is absolutely negligible. It's not working, particularly when you have criteria such as, have you tried to change your council tax band? That's really got to be reviewed very urgently.
I'm sorry, Rosie, I ought to at that point. We're double time, so we'll perhaps draw comments to a close, if I may.
Okay. Well, those are my main points, really. I'd be interested in Councillor Golbe's reflections on that. Thank you.
But also, even before Matt steps in, I fully agree with you. We know that poverty is scattered across the rural areas. Sometimes it's easier to see in the urban areas, and it's clustered together. It might be hidden, it might be scattered in the rural areas, but we know it's there. And we know also that it's different. I'm acutely aware of friends I have who use heating oil, and as you say, the transport issues and so on. So please be reassured that we're all aware of that. You make a good point, like the examples and so on. So I don't know if Matt can.
So I'm reassured you know. It's just I wasn't entirely clear from the strategy whether we knew that you knew, as it were.
Yeah, no. Let's ask Matt also to give you some reassurance. We're also going to bring Adam in on one of the comments that you made as well. Matt, over to you first.
Yeah, I think, as I said at the start, I wanted to make sure that this covers us from urban and rural, and make sure it doesn't discriminate between the two. Your point of rural exclusion, it is a very fair point, and I think it's something we've got to make sure we take into account when we are putting in the actions and the measures to make sure we can try and account in some way for a measure against rural exclusion, or points around what we can do to put together to something that starts to address it, whether it's transport, as we talked about earlier. And you mentioned the Poverty Truth Commission. I will check and see what they did in terms of engaging rural people that were experiencing poverty, and I'll come back to you on that. And on the fuel, I think Jonathan's covered that bit, but certainly I'll see if I can come back to you on some of those points. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Adam, you wanted to comment, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I apologise for not having informed Councillor Humphreys of a successful outcome, in that with the help of the Chief Executive, we have amended the terms of the Household Support Fund and the way that we're administering it. So people using fuel oil are now eligible for the support, as they should have been under the terms of the government's criteria. absolutely right to highlight that very important issues which affects villages in my ward. It's not like if you're running low on fuel in your car, you can't do a splash and dash and just have a £5
Exactly.
worth of fuel oil delivered to your house. It's a seriously expensive outlay of hundreds of pounds at a time. And I think it's something that even nationally there isn't the awareness of that the situation merits.
Yeah.
And we are, as you say, quite rightly talking about families, about pensioners who simply through a lack of choice because of their geography do not have the choice in terms of the fuel that they can use that people in more urban areas do. I think that going back to the strategy itself, I think it takes a reasonable holistic approach of poverty that will affect all areas within the district. It probably could do more in targeting specifically those rural isolation issues, but I think by piecemeal, it will address most of the root causes of poverty that we see affecting our rural areas. It talks about fuel poverty, which can extend to users of fuel oil. It talks about housing costs, which are particularly exacerbated in rural areas. And so, we as rural ward members, I think, need to pay particularly close attention to that. I know you have done so, Councillor Humphreys, and I'll continue to do so as well.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Adam. And that's great news to be aware of, and quite right, as you say, quite right that fuel oil is covered. We've one last speaker then on this item, which is Councillor Meredith. Oh, sorry. I think Anna's going to come in as well. Anna, over to you.
Sorry, just apologies. I don't want to mislead people because the original household fund that we're talking about actually ended on the 31st of March. So, and we had to make sure that we'd paid out everything we could. You weren't allowed to run them over. But it's just worth saying, so we did pick up oil payments and started making sure that we were doing those. We're waiting to see what else happens in terms of future household funds. The other thing to say is that obviously council taxpayers will get their £150, which is the non-refundable contribution towards fuel bills for properties A to D shortly. We couldn't pay it in the April one because the guidance was we needed a successful direct debit to come out before we automatically credited people's account with £150. And then there is a further £790,000 pot for discretionary help for council taxpayers in higher bands, so above D, or where they're vulnerable and they want to apply, which is up to another £150 per household. And I know it's really messy. It's just unfortunate that all the different schemes that have come out look like that. We will have information on the website on them, but I just would want to make sure that people don't think they can keep on applying for the household support fund that stopped, but there are other schemes now in place that we'll make sure is published for people to access.
Thanks, Anna. Matt, were you coming? Oh, okay, sorry. Yes, sorry. So, Councillor Meredith, Dennis, over to you. You're there and ready. We're ready for you.
Ready to go.
Over to you.
Ready to go. As usual, I'm always the last one. Firstly, can I say, Jonathan, that I've had quite a few productive meetings with Michael Ellis. Been very, very supportive to my campaign that I'm trying to run within Talavera. So I will say that to you. So I'm very impressed with him and what he's done. I'd just like to read just a small paragraph, if I may, from the executive summary. In our corporate plan for West Northamptonshire, we are committed to focus on the things that are significantly improve the quality of life, well-being of all our residents. That's a real good quote. I think that's absolutely perfect. I have raised this issue many, many times, calling for money to be put into Talavera. This is all about levelling up. To date, I have not seen any money coming in the way of Talavera. I have a list coming into Talavera, not coming into the area of Talavera. I have a list of things for the £1 million that I'm calling for could be used. I have told that there is money in the budget for my area, but so far I have not seen a penny. Nothing's been forthcoming. When is this administration going to give me the money that I'm asking for to be spent for the residents of Talavera? I would like to suggest that the £1 million I am calling for can be taken out of reserves. As far as I am concerned, it's scandalous to have over £40 million in reserves and have not seen a penny being spent on Talavera. Here is the list that can be spent in my area. And I have this list to give to Malcolm Longley, who has told me that he wants to have a list from me, and I have prepared this list for him. Community centre, I've earmarked £500,000, which would include youth club facilities, day facilities for seniors, and a park cafe where people could meet, socialise, and feel wanted. I've also earmarked youth club funding of 150,000. That's important at this time because the youth services has now nearly diminished in Northamptonshire. Very few youth workers are employed, if any at all. So that £150,000 would enable people to organise in that community centre youth facilities. Play facilities for children, I've earmarked £150,000. That play equipment would be for a very deprived area, which is known as Blackthorn. Blackthorn, as you know, is one of the areas where it is a no-go area, where something has to be done drastically. Crime, prostitution, homelessness, drug use, you name it, it's at Blackthorn. And it is absolutely appalling. Community orchard. Although we have a community allotment for a few people that have their gardens taken away from them by Northamptonshire Partnership Homes, I personally have made available a small community garden for them to use, which is in a form of raised beds. But we need more. We need a community orchard where people can go, sit and talk about all their problems and really become part of the community. Outreach support for council services. Now, this is very, very important. Outreach support for council services would include the police, the fire brigade, which we had in a terrible incident within Ecton Brook, I think it was Rectory Farm, where several houses got caught fire, and there was something like 15 fire engines put in at that fire. That's the sort of thing so if we had them services and they could be based at the community centre. Now, on saying the community centre, I, with Toby Birch from Community Spaces, have drawn up plans for this community centre. I've also found a place where this community centre can be built, where it could serve the residents. And this is on the actual sports field on Southfields. The other thing, I have contacted the officers concerned, asking for meetings to be arranged so I can take the plans to them and show them what we've actually drawn up. They've been drawn up by a private company employed by Community Spaces. And if you see these plans, you'd be very, very surprised. So far to date, I have not had any response to my emails asking for a meeting, which I'm totally annoyed about. And this just takes me back to a finish up, Chair. This takes me back to the things that I've been saying. I've been going on since I've been a councillor, that's 16 years, trying to get money to be spent in Talavera for the levelling up. And to some point, I have to say, although I have a reputation of being a councillor who listens to residents, but I feel because I've been having my back against the wall, nobody's been listening to me. And I appeal to you. I have tried over the last, since the new council took place, I have tried to work with the cabinet. I have tried to say to them, listen to me. I've invited members from the cabinet to come to my ward. And fair enough, they've done that. They've done that.
Dennis, at that point, without.
I don't want to, Jonathan, I don't want to go on.
I'm
so
particularly
I'll stop.
careful not to cut people off. 3 minutes is the allocated speaking slot to comment on a report. You've had 7.5, 8 minutes.
Well, that's
And,
good.
and I get it. Now I understand your passion, and actually we all admire your passion for your ward.
Thank
We
you.
really do. I think if we went round each cabinet member, they wouldn't know the precise answer on expenditure, because actually what they're working is to get rid of inequality across the whole of West Northants. But I think we would find most service areas are spending at least proportionate within Talavera already. There's clearer further ambitions. We don't mind keeping that dialogue on. I know a number of cabinet members have. I don't know if any cabinet members want to particularly, I think Matt Adams is going to chip in with a comment at that point.
Yeah, just to reassure Councillor Meredith that MPH in particular continue to invest heavily in Talavera ward. Over the past couple of months alone, I've had 2 site visits to new housing developments in Talavera, Pell Court being one, Homestead Court being another. Many of these are family homes for up to 4-bedroom houses, townhouse style. The Homestead Court development will include a community centre facility as well. This is continued investment in Talavera, and Councillor Meredith shakes his head, Mr. Chairman. I think it's a bit facetious to demand investment in Talavera and then turn his nose up when it comes along. You know, MPH are being very careful to level up in Talavera, provide better homes, and I'm proud that they're doing so.
That's nothing. Northamptonshire Parties Homes is nothing to do with poverty strategy. It's actually about supplying.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, actually,
on the waiting list.
housing costs, additional housing is fundamental to the cost of living and anti-poverty. If we don't provide people with stable, affordable homes, then poverty will become entrenched and it will get worse and worse. And we must continue to invest in sustainable and affordable homes across West Northamptonshire.
We have to accept.
You're just making excuses.
Well, look, we have to accept that unfortunately your comments, Dennis, have meant that whilst sympathetic, we've degenerated into a pretty ineffective discussion. And I think the last 10 minutes of our lives have not necessarily been productive. I think Phil wants to make a comment. I'm going to suggest Phil makes his comment. Anybody else who wants to comment on what the council is doing in Talavera, I think Fiona does too. But let's go to Phil next and then we'll take this to the vote.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Chairman, that in order to deliver, you need community facilities. And Matt and David and I have been and met with Dennis, and we've looked at the community facilities on Southfields. And I'd been before because under the previous regime, I got involved and I did report to you at the time, the situation. The community centre up there is totally and utterly unfit for purpose. You have a community room that abuts somebody's bedroom. So how can you have any events? How can you do anything? And it's high time, in all honesty, I do have some sympathy with Councillor Meredith. There is a great opportunity to sell that facility for housing, as half of it has been done already, and then invest what we make out of the sale into a proper community facility, because you're only going to be able to deliver a lot of the work that's necessary to discharge the responsibilities for anti-poverty and help people if you've got a viable community centre. And I'm very sorry to say, Chair, and I've said it for the last 7 or 8 years, Southfields has not got that facility and is desperately in need of it. And I'm sure Matt and David, who've seen it as well, would agree with me on that. Thank you.
And I think that came up as part, if not otherwise, with that visit that was undertaken. David might want to comment. But Fiona, you were going to come in? Okay, let's widen back out from Talavera to West Northants and go to Fiona for a comment. Shall we comment, Fiona?
I just wanted to say that nobody around this room today can doubt the passion that Councillor Golby put this across to everybody. We all know in the Cabinet how hard he's been working with Stuart here to put this together and how firmly he believes in it all. And I firmly support him in that act. It will make enormous differences to both our portfolios for adults and for children, particularly I feel for children, because we do know that poverty is something that's just going to hold them back for the whole of their life. They need good education, they need good housing, they need good food, and that will give them a much better chance in life. And that's what I want for our children. I view all children in West Northants as being our children, and this poverty strategy will go a long way to helping. And I will support Councillor Golby in whatever he comes forward. I haven't been part of the discussions, but I have been part of Councillor Golby speaking to us on a weekly basis of how this is going forward. And really, I'm really interested that West Northants is that council that wants to make improvements and wants to be a good council.
Thank you. Thank you, Fiona. I think we're all proud of that. And yeah, once again, thank you to Matt and everybody involved, their enthusiasm. I think that's probably concludes all of our comments. Is that right? Any further comments at all? Matt, you're going to come into some, oh, sorry, Rebecca, make a comment then?
Yes, I'm just going to come in and say that it's really interesting hearing all the contributions tonight. And a lot of people here do know, but I don't think I need to declare it as an interest, but I do work as a specialist benefit debt advisor at Citizens Advice, specialising in South Northamptonshire as well. So my clients are all, funnily enough, mainly from my ward. I see a lot of my clients, and I do understand the depths of difficulty that people are facing. I had my client on Monday had £1.25 on their prepayment meter and a universal credit payment not due for 10 days. I was able to access them some grant funding, and it is there. Signposting is absolutely key in helping our residents, and I do think that perhaps all councillors should know where to signpost residents too. And there is a plethora of support out there. It's not just councils. I know the big energy firms are setting up funds very fast to provide support to their customers, because fuel poverty is absolutely the crunch point at the moment. I don't think we're going to see any respite in the next cap in October. I think actually it's going to get worse, and that's pre-winter. So I think in the interregnum, we as a council need to prepare for that and make sure that we are absolutely clear where our residents can access funding. But it's not just in Northampton. The issues in the rural areas are very, very serious. Middleton Cheney, my biggest town, which has got 4,000 people, has real areas of deprivation. It doesn't appear in the indices because it's just not big enough. But I know the streets. I know the addresses that come on my citizens advice. So it's I think it is something I know my cabinet colleagues have heard me talk about CAB and the work that I get involved with. I've been doing it for 10 years, so I'm really well embedded. And also providing support for those community organisations is key, because actually it's a multiplier effect. I'm a volunteer, all my colleagues are volunteers, there are a couple of paid positions, but the work we do amplifies throughout the community. So West Northampton supporting Citizens Advice and others is also very important. But I do think the wider public need to know that the Cabinet do know and do get what is going on in the wider world.
Thank you. Yeah,
and obviously I completely support the strategy. I think it's a very, very useful tool.
Thank you, Rebecca. And that actually points out to me that it may be, with your experience, worth us considering for this week's members briefing newsletter, whether we should be highlighting some of these places that you refer people to, or indeed whether we should just be highlighting that they go to agencies like Citizens Advice. Perhaps we'll have a reflect on that, but it would be helpful perhaps to produce something, wouldn't it? Thank you. And so back to Matt, I think, for a couple of summary comments. Matt?
Yeah, just very briefly, I thank everybody for their comments. This is a very emotive subject, isn't it? From wherever we are in the patch, whether rural or urban, some very valid points drawn out, and I've made 3 pages of notes based on every all the points that people have made, and there's some things that we can certainly action and do something with and add value into the strategy in the next phase that we're going into. And Dennis knows I have every sympathy with the points he makes, and I really hope we can make some progress for his patch and everywhere else as well. But I thank everybody for their support and their comments, and I really look forward to us in a year sitting here again and saying, well, what have we done?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And so the recommendations, as you can see, are to, as a formal policy, to approve the anti-poverty strategy for adoption, to approve the continued engagements of community partners, to develop a robust set of actions and get on with the job, and then to approve the creation of additional delivery fund to underpin the strategy. Can I just ask for your agreement to those recommendations? Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much indeed. Takes us on to item 8. This one is with Lizzie. This is the appointment of the operator for the Vulcan Works. Lizzie will introduce. We have one speaker, which is Councillor Sally Beardsworth. Lizzie, over to you. Yeah, we have no problem with that at all, Sally. If you prefer to stay there, yeah, great.
Yep, okay. So this report seeks approval to enter into contract with the preferred bidder for the operation of the Vulcan Works Creative Hub. So just as a reminder, the Vulcan Works site is a £14 million project funded mainly by SEMLEP plus the previous Northampton Borough Council and some monies from the ERDF. It's got 50,000 square feet of office space with 75 businesses already expressing an interest in having their premises there. So the Vulcan Works aims to expand and develop Northampton's cultural quarter and the Northampton Enterprise Zone by establishing new creative activity in a creative business centre. The centre will be set up as a managed workspace centre and contains 68 new lettable units, which is a mixture of co-working space and office space and creative workshops. The operator will run and manage this block, and we are, I'll give you more details about that in a moment. The centre will offer on-site business support, such as business coaching, as well as including breakout areas and bookable meeting rooms, which can be used by the businesses located within the centre. This project will act as a key part of the council's recovery strategy post-pandemic. Supporting businesses as we head out of the pandemic is an important part of the recovery plan for Northampton to help nurture and grow businesses which may have been detrimentally affected by the current situation. The procurement process chosen was something known as a CPN, a competitive procedure with negotiation. There were 3 bidders shortlisted, and then 2 of these were invited to submit a final tender price. A summary of the criteria they were assessed against is set out in points 5.17 to 5.22, with officers from a range of teams used to help score the relevant sections. I thought it was useful to highlight some of those teams involved to demonstrate the rigour that's actually been used in this process. So areas included were the major projects and regeneration team, assets, economy, assurance and performance, communications, legal and finance, as well as SEMLEP. So they were all involved in this strategy and this scoring. So a table summarising the scores is set out in 5.6, with the winning bidder scoring higher in both the quality and the cost criteria. So that's 5.6. And there's a table there for you. As the centre will be starting out, there will be a period where the centre loses money ahead of hitting break even. What has been submitted by the bidders are forecasts with the council sitting with the risk if this isn't achieved. There is £150,000 COVID recovery monies ring-fenced to cover some of the deficit that will be drawn down to reduce this impact. Dun & Bradstreet checks have been undertaken to assess the financial suitability and background of the final shortlist. It is recommended that the Cabinet approve the preferred bidder. And if you go to the recommendations, it's quite a brief recommendation to approve the appointment of the preferred bidder following the procurement process for the operation of the Vulcan Works Creative Hub, using a CPN, otherwise known as a competitive procedure with negotiation. So not to do this would mean not offering incubation space for businesses in Northampton, which would be contrary to our objectives and also would not fulfil targets set by the funder SEMLEP, which may then result in a clawback of that money. Since publishing has taken place, I am pleased to announce that Oxford Innovations has been appointed as the operator, and contracts are being finalised as we speak. And for those of you that don't know Oxford Innovations, they are experts in the growth of early stages and startup businesses. They're considered one of the best in the UK, and they have a track record of 30 years in this specialised area of business. So I think this is a good news story. I know we've all been waiting for it for a while, but here we are, we're ready to go. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lizzie. Yeah, that's absolutely great. So we have one speaker on this. Sally, feel free to stay where you are. You're our speaker. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I welcome this report. We all know how long it's taken to get the Vulcan Centre off the ground. I think it's been with us for quite some time. I'm very interested because I think this is a real innovative scheme that can actually set up businesses and be a really asset to Northampton Town and to West Northants Council. I'm interested in actually the performance monitoring of the company as well. I think that's strategic in the plans that we must make sure that it's being run effectively. The company itself has a good record, but we still need to keep an eye on it because I understand that if we fail, it'll come back onto us, the risk factors. So, and also it should be accessible to all. And that means getting people in from out of town into the town to actually work in these premises as well. And that could be looked at something with the bus strategy as well, to get buses to come, or mini buses to bring people into work, to save the parking and things like that. But I agree with it, and it's a welcome step forward. We've really been with this operation for quite some time, and it'll be a real asset to the county. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. I don't think there's anything to respond there to necessarily. Is there any other, unless you want to add anything? No,
Just to say that, I mean, any contract is only as good as that enforcement and monitoring, isn't it? So you're absolutely right. And we were only discussing that yesterday with regard to the highways contract.
Yeah.
So completely agree.
Yep. Jolly good. You say Oxford Innovations have got an excellent reputation. I've heard of them in this sort of sector, and I think they're going to do really well and offer that full support. I think we'll soon see the building full. Lots of new businesses within that part of the town, and the sort of creative arts area flourish. So it's really fantastic. Okay, in which case I'll just ask then, if there's no further comments, can I just ask Cabinet to see the recommendations, section 3, confirm your agreement to those recommendations. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. That takes us on to item 9. This is with David, Ukraine reports, for which we then have 3 speakers, Councillor Emma Roberts, Councillor Jonathan Harris and Councillor Sally Beardsworth. So David, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, the main part of the report is the Ukrainian scheme, but we must mention our Afghan resettlement, and that's ongoing. They are absolutely in our focus as well, so there's no change there. There were some concerns of some of the Afghan guests that we have that with what's going on in the Ukraine and our wonderful efforts with the Homes for Ukraine, that they would be forgotten, and they've been reassured. And of course, they won't be forgotten. None of us will forget them, I'm sure. So attached to the report is a fairly hefty set of slides, so I won't reference everything in there, but just onto the Afghan resettlement. So as everybody should know, we've got 2 hotels in the west that we're hosting within. We know the date went live 1st of September 2021. I can't believe it's just, what, 7-8 months. It seems so much longer. But in the time that we've been going through that, we've learnt so much. And I think that as a council, we should be proud of our staff and officers in the delivery of a first-class provision to these poor people who've come from Afghanistan. listed there. You've got numbers of people who've moved on, the number of people that we've currently got, etc., etc. So I won't dwell on that too much, but happy to take questions on that. So moving on, so we've got two parts of the Ukrainian response so far. We've got the family scheme, which is detailed within the slides, and then of course the Homes for Ukraine, which is the bulk of this report. The Ukraine family scheme, we don't have oversight of that. That's something which we will support where needed. Yeah, that's something. It's something we will react to if needed. So just moving through the slides. I've been out with my highlighter pen today. You'll be pleased it's not been overused. So the Homes for Ukraine phase 1, there is a phase 2 coming, but we're not up to speed completely on where that's going to be at the moment. So essentially, anybody coming to the UK from the Ukraine has the right to live and work here for up to 3 years, and will have access to all the benefits which would come with that settlement status. Moving on, apologies. There were concerns or questions from people who were potentially becoming sponsors, and there's on one slide it references around benefits and council tax and things, and if you were to host a family or a person, it would have no detrimental effect on your payments. So moving on further, sorry, zinging through. There has been a bit of a challenge in matching sponsors to people coming over from the Ukraine, and there is a charity called Reset who've now, I think it's a pilot that's being run, and hopefully that will smooth further that process. It's probably not the nicest of words to use, process, but that's essentially what it is. So the role of us as a council is very clear. It's detailed in the report. I won't go through it again, but just to say, if anybody's got any questions at any stage, not only tonight, but as we move on, just ping me an email or whatever, and we will always look to respond. We have had some fairly lengthy emails come through, which are well-intentioned, but they've burned quite a lot of officer time, and at the moment we are in, if you like, firefighting mode just to get things absolutely tickety-boo. So if they can be pushed through members' inquiries, I know it's not the process in which we would all like, but we've got capacity, we have capacity, but only just capacity. So if we can push things down the member inquiries line where possible, it does really help, and it helps the people we are helping. There is a slide there about the role of the council with regards to the accommodation checks. I won't go through that too much. And safeguarding checks, that's very, very important. That's the one thing, top of the tree. We have to safeguard these people that come from a terrible situation. And the last thing we want to do is present them into I'm sure nowhere near that they've come from, but we do not want to put them under any further stress. Then moving on to the funding. So there's a tariff for the first year of £10,500 per person. We don't have any information with regard to anything beyond that, so obviously running into the years 2 and 3. But what I would like to say is I have spoken with officers on this in depth, and it's felt that the £10,500 per person is well sufficient to provide for what we envisage we would need to do. And has been said, it's probably unlikely that we would spend all that money. So to be assured that this is a well-funded initiative. There is also funding for schooling, which again is detailed in the report, and also does cover SEND as well, which I think is very, very important. So our current position, we have a county-wide tactical coordination group, so that covers anything and everything we can think of. And that is along with, of course, North Northamptonshire Health, Police and Fire. We're setting up, or have set up, an internal working group as well. There are numbers that were quoted in the report. So total numbers sponsor households as of Friday is 155, and that totals Ukrainian guests coming through 303 people. I'll draw a line there and open up to any questions we may have.
Jolly good. Thank you, David. I think the fantastic West Northants response again, as it was with the Afghan evacuees, resettlers, and I think we've responded really well in West Northants as a population, and certainly as a council we can be proud of that. So much so that I think we've become an exemplar for the hotels we've been running for the Afghan resettlers, and that's a huge credit, most particularly to the staff who have worked in the hotels, but around them too, and has been the reason why we've seen resettlers continue to transfer into our West Northants hotels, sometimes even, I think, from other bridging hotels. And we'll step up to this one too. This one, as a community response, brings a lot of challenges, and it can't be underestimated how challenging it might be for those generous people who are putting forward their own accommodation. And our job, I think, is to build the support around them. That's why we've been so grateful that church groups, local community groups, and all sorts. Tomorrow we're doing a briefing with parish councils, aren't we, to make sure that they're aware, because I think we do need to build support networks around every one of the individuals or households that opens up their space to evacuees from Ukraine. Let's bring in then at that point our speakers, first of which is Councillor Roberts. Emma, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Smith, for the report. Sorry, I might get these out of order now because your commentary gave me some additional questions and I've scribbled them around my notes, so forgive me. I attended the meeting that's referenced in the report on the 5th of April, and I thought it was a really incredibly well attended and really responsive meeting, and a number of people in the room were there. Again, there was a lot of listening and a lot of answers being given, which is always useful. I was a little bit disappointed there wasn't a bit more of the feedback that was given at the meeting within the report, because I think that might have been helpful for those that weren't around the table, particularly around possibly the authority considering any super sponsorship or becoming an organisation that might be a sponsor overall of those wanting to come. So something for Cabinet to consider later, perhaps. David mentioned the 10.5k, and I'm really interested to understand that officers think that we won't be anywhere near spending that 10.5k, and I wondered whether or not we had answers around how we draw down that 10,500. So is this a process whereby we spend it and claim it back, or is this a process whereby we say today, right, we've got 10 people here, we now get £100,000, and then we have to give some money back, or what's the process? How are we going to deal with that and deliver it? And if we don't spend the 10.5k, do we have to give it back? How do we manage and process that? Because if we're looking at about 300 people, as based on the numbers in the report, it's £1.8 million. And the community and voluntary sector, who are already supporting significant groups of refugees in the area who aren't part of these schemes, could obviously do with some of that additional funding. So I'd be really interested to understand how we're going to use that. Another couple of questions around what systems are we putting in place, or are we going to put in place to ensure there's no rent charged for people so that people aren't exploited by those that are hopefully offering true sanctuary? How will follow-ups be completed? Are other departments going to be expected to follow up? Are we going to be calling on resources from other areas? And if we are, given that we've talked here a lot about how our enforcement areas and our warden areas are already overstretched, how are we going to manage that? There's 4 staff and 1 manager mentioned. Is that going to be enough to oversee wellbeing and safety? I think we really need to consider that, because we need to have the infrastructure in place beforehand. What will we do? What will we be doing even to ensure that we've got Ukrainian and Russian speaking interpreters, or will staff be recruited to be able to deliver that support? And will it be ensured that that same support offering is here within our schools? I've already asked how the money is going to be held. I just got a query on the number. Is the 303 individuals, is that individuals or is that family groups? And we've got 155 households currently offered. So how is that going to work if we've not got enough? And there's no reference to the Council of Sanctuary in the report. And given that we passed a motion to look to become a Council of Sanctuary, I'd just like to have seen reference to that, and I'd like to understand where we've got to with that process, if I could. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. A lot of points. There's some good points raised. Thank you, Emma. David might respond to some of them. I think Adam might chip in on the super sponsor thing as well, or you may answer it, David. Over to you first of all, Dave.
I think actions speak louder than words. We are a council sanctuary. The question with regard to the numbers is 303 people. You bring up the point reference staff. That's a start point. We have to have identified need, and we will move fast should we need to. Funding, part up front, part build. There will be codes against which, for example, I don't know, clothing, there will be a code against that which we would bill against. So there'll be a whole raft of codes. It clearly needs to be auditable. You mentioned super sponsorship. We have to be a responsible council. We are a responsible council, and we realise there is possible breakdown in some of these host families or host households. So we have to be responsible. We have X amount of capacity, and for us to become a super sponsor, that is a whole raft of additional work and capacity, which can we find it? We don't know. So no, it would not be responsible in my opinion at this stage, but it's something that we have an eye on. So I think that's covered probably not all of your questions, Emma, because you're good at getting a lot out really quick.
Right, I'm very happy to send them to you as well, David, just so we can consider those. I appreciate your answers, even if I don't necessarily agree with your stance,
Yeah.
but I appreciate your detail. Thank you.
I think Adam's going to add a comment. Was this on the super sponsors, Adam?
Yes, absolutely. I think goes without saying that everybody around this table and across the council wants to do as much as possible to help alleviate this situation. But as Councillor Smith has already said, we do need to proceed with caution, simply out of compassion for the people that we are trying to help. And we need to be very mindful of the fact that there is a clear difference in the capacity of a devolved administration in Scotland or Wales, which can delegate down to their own councils, versus a unitary authority in England, where we do have finite capacity. We only have so much officer resource. And as the report tonight lays out very clearly, that officer resource is also being stretched in two other directions with migrant hotels and Afghan bridging hotels. And I would also point out that from my understanding, at least having read local press across the country, the people of West Northamptonshire are amongst the most generous in all of England in putting forward their accommodation, in putting forward their offers of support. And so we should already be immensely proud of what this area is doing to help the people of Ukraine, to help the evacuees coming over to England. And there will always be the desire to do more, but I would just caution everybody, we have to remember what is possible, not just what's desirable. So we'll always have an eye on what more we can do, but please be mindful of the fact that our officers are already doing an incredible amount, and we're having to pull in extra resource from NPH to fulfill our statutory checks of the accommodation that people are going into. And we are, I feel, very, very close to organisational capacity on that front. So let's be proud of what people are doing, and if and when more becomes possible, then let's do it. But I fear possibly not right now.
If I may, Chair, I think if you've got the political will to proceed, you'll find the next step that's needed. But I'm, immensely, I'll be the first person to say, Adam, that this wouldn't have happened 10 years ago. And I think I did say it last time, and I think we've moved on in leaps and bounds. So really happy to see the report.
Thank you. Thank you for all your comments, Emma. So our next speaker then is Councillor Harris. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. I have a few questions, firstly, in relation to the aspect which refers to the Afghan refugees. I note that we still have 200 or so still in our hotels. So I have a couple of questions in relation to this, really regarding what the plan is in terms of actually trying to find, obviously, the opportunity to move those people from that hotel situation as swiftly as possible, because it has been now quite some months. So that's my first question, really, around how we, what is the plan to make that as top of the list as we possibly can. In regards to Ukraine specifically, on Saturday, I handed over a list of 35 visa applications, which appear to be stuck in the system, to MP Chris Eaton Harris at his coffee morning in Brixworth. I've attended myself 3 community meetings, one in Spratton with 80 attendees, the Northampton meeting, which I think there were around 50, and a further meeting in Crick with around 20. So there is a real desire out there to do what people can to support this particular issue. I would, however, urge this council to do more and to lobby for more. There are some fundamental problems in the system that still remain. That's not a council issue, but it is definitely an issue that people are facing. Hosts are telling me that the system is designed to make it difficult. That's not my view, that's their view. And I think that's a really important point that we need to try and address and deal with and provide some sort of influence if we possibly can, because it is taking longer than it should do. Applications themselves appear not to have any time determination around them in terms of processing. So people are making applications, and applications that come in later are being processed earlier than the ones that were made some weeks earlier. So there's a real issue in the system. There are also visas being held back and delayed where you've got 18-month-old babies. They can travel on birth certificates, but actually that slows the system down. And we have issues of people that are waiting 2, 3, 4 weeks in some instances because it adds time and more bureaucracy. And for those families, they have money when they leave, but actually they're running out of money rapidly because they can't actually move any further than the country that's immediate to them. In regards to this particular report, of course, I welcome it. I have one major issue or major point of clarification, and that's in regards to the £200 emergency cash. Hosts are actually being told that they are going to get vouchers, not cash. The government recommendation is cash, and the document, the presentation, refers to cash. The bottom line is people will need cash. Vouchers are not going to be sufficient for people who are arriving with nothing. And this is a real concern for hosts. Other councils are providing cash vouchers or preloaded cash cards or voucher cash code emails that can be cashed in at any post office. I've said cash enough, but I think the point I'm trying to make is that this is going to be quite a key issue for people. There's been a couple of instances of hosts carrying out their own DBS checks to try and speed up the process. It's now clear that these aren't accepted. They have to be carried out by the council. And whilst the website, our own website, highlights the need for DBS checks, it doesn't actually make this clear. And I think it would be very helpful to make a minor amendment to the website to make it clear that these checks must be done by the council, and you can't really speed up the system by doing it yourself. I think there's a further opportunity to be clear about the practical help and advice that hosts can tap into regarding accessing GP practices, dentists and schools, etc. I gather there's a parish clerk briefing tomorrow. I would urge that we provide a briefing for West Northants councillors. And as there is a briefing tomorrow, those of us that have been involved in this type of process, I would ask that we are included in that opportunity to join that briefing tomorrow if that's possible. Some of you will have heard me talk about the opportunities to build hubs. It looks like my ward is going to have a fair number, potentially, of host houses. So I would welcome the opportunity to explore the opportunity of looking at a hub potentially built and located around Brixworth Community Centre and Library. Final couple of points, if I may. With regards to the Task and Finish group, again, can we please make sure that that is as broad as possible? Some of you will have met the Ukrainian family that live within my ward. There's definitely an opportunity to include them in that type of Task and Finish group, I think, for support and advice. Furthermore, I really just want to say that we've got a real opportunity here to play a real part. I hear the point about resourcing, and I understand that completely. I have at least 20 volunteers that are willing to do whatever they can, and I think there's an opportunity potentially for the council to tap in more fully to those people who aren't going to be paid officers or paid support, but actually are on the ground and can actually work very closely with these people. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Jonathan, and some helpful stuff. This is a jigsaw that's piecing itself together. I've learned some stuff from the comments you've made. Colleagues may have been aware. And I think it's interesting, Brixworth. I think one thing that occurs to me is, not sure where exactly we're mapping, I think, where the sponsors are coming forward, but I think you do need community around, and in Brixworth, you've got a nice sized community. And if there is a cluster of people, that probably is a good place for a hub, really. I think there's something about children who start to go to school as they arrive, being in the same school. I think you need it somewhere of a reasonable size, perhaps rather than scatter an individual family across many small villages. David, did you want to comment on some of those points that Jonathan's made?
Always. Thank you, Chair. So just on the vouchers, DLUC have confirmed that vouchers are acceptable, so in their position. So that's you know, it's a fast-moving situation. You've mentioned hubs. This is no particular order. It's just my scraggy piece of paper here. Hubs, yes, that's something we're looking at. I mean, I think it's safe to say that all the suggestions that came out last Tuesday, we were pretty much doing all of those things. So it's quite encouraging to see that we're aligned with the thinking of the voluntary sector, et cetera, et cetera. So back to our Afghan guests, what's the plan? Well, we are challenged where we've got larger family units, and to accommodate those, it's finding the housing. So that is the challenge there. But we do also have, you know, we are continuing to get arrivals. We are a victim of our own success as far as that's concerned. Moving on to visas, we raised this. We had a meeting with all our MPs on Friday, and we've asked that to be raised. But of course, I think we will need to, you know, raise it with Richard Harrington, who's the Minister for Refugees as well. Speed of the system with regard to the applications things, that's just simply not in our control. Again, maybe that's something for Richard Harrington and his department. Well, moving on, doctors, yes, we will assist in where we can, but that again, that is to a degree, it's a responsibility of the sponsor. They are, you know, they know where their doctor is, et cetera, et cetera. You know, we are a facilitator, we're a supporter, but it's going to be our communities, and that's in tomorrow's meeting with the parishes is really important. So we're not telling them to get involved, we're asking whether they'd like to get involved. Interestingly, a number was picked out. It's thought that around 5 people would be required per household to support network of 5 people around each household to make this happen. I probably haven't covered all your questions, but if you want to zing them across on an email or whatever, and I'll certainly cover those off.
Just the clarification on the last point, if those of us who are interested, would we be able to join that parish briefing tomorrow who are involved?
The more the merrier, yeah. I'm not sure I will get the invite out. I'm sure Joe will better sort that out. But
Okay.
it's that meeting it's about the towns and parishes and their appetite and their interest, which from what we've seen is huge. But it would be presumptuous of us to just assume that they're going to get involved. But
We are probably due a members briefing, aren't we? So we sent the parish council's newsletter to all members, but I'm not sure if the link was in there, and we certainly didn't invite them to attend. Number of things occur. We might, with their permission, record it, and we can stick it on the members area, the Teams forum where all the training stuff is, so members could dip in and listen to it. And that would probably be quicker than doing a members briefing, although we're due a members briefing, I think, aren't we? So perhaps we'll have a quick think after, David, on how we might tackle that.
I think so. I mean, there's an hour slot set aside. We know people they're busy. We only sent the invitation out on Friday to the parishes. So yeah, if we can record it, but certainly it's you know, the clerks, I'm sure will report back. But we want to be, you know, concise. Want to get that meeting now tomorrow, so we know we continue to move in a really positive way.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Jonathan. Then our final speaker, Councillor Beardsworth. Again,
Can I say
Sally, and
same
over to
here?
you.
Thank you very much for being so understanding. A couple of questions, really. It says eligibility, guests will be able to live and work in the UK for up to 3 years. Now, I don't know about you, but having seen the pictures of the Ukraine, I don't think Mariupol and places like that are going to be rebuilt in 3 years. It could probably be closer to 10, 15 years before they're rebuilt. Plus the fact we might be having doctors, nurses, health workers, dentists, other skills coming from this country that will benefit us here. You know, we have a shortage of doctors, we have a shortage of health workers, and that could really help. I mean, and I know even with warehouses can't get enough staff. They're shipping people in from all over the country. So it could be a benefit and I'd like to have that 3 year looked at. I know it's a government thing, but if you've got people here who are prepared to settle and contribute with good skills. We shouldn't be saying you only got 3 years, because there's no way they're going to rebuild some of the parts of the Ukraine in that period of time. That's one point. I really must insist, it does say on this, to administer an interim of £200 cash payment per guest on arrival. And that's not a voucher, that's cash. You know, and I know that there's times when you always need cash. You've got cards we can use, but there's always a time when you need cash. And these people will need to go and buy things at different places. They can't just go to one place and buy it. They'll have to go to different places. So cash, to me, is essential. And plus, it's come from some central government. So I think it really needs that to do. Also, we've looked at recruiting retired teachers to help educate children after school in learning the language, plus the people who are coming to this country who don't speak English. So I think that would be something we could do in the hubs, for instance, Brixworth Library, after closing time, 2 hours a night, night school. We've got teachers lined up, prepared to help. So I think that would be another good thing. And to administer 350 thank you payment to the sponsor each month. I think that might need to be reviewed. If you've got a family of 4 living with you, with washing, cooking, all the other bits, and the electric bills as they are, I think 350 will not cover all the costs. So I think it might need to be reviewed or topped up by the council in other ways. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sally. And I think that is a risk. This is not a money-making scheme, is it? Costs will go up, and I think there is that risk, and that could be another reason for the failure of some placements, couldn't it, amongst with many others. On the cash thing, we'll be in touch with what other councils are doing, and we would have given careful thought to how we're doing things. David, did you want to make any further comment on that?
Where cash is an issue, we would look at it. It's on a case-by-case basis, and we're making a big assumption that people are turning up without, the ability with, a card, etc. So yes, we will look at that. This is a fast-moving situation, and it's easy to sort of draw up our potential shortcomings. Just if we look at the timings that we've had to react to this, I think a little breathing space here and there would be beneficial. But yes, we will look at the cash situation should it present itself.
David, can I come in? We've got a family arriving tomorrow, and we hope that they'll be given a cash payment tomorrow, if that's humanly possible.
Okay,
well, thank you for drawing that attention to that. And the earlier we know that, the better. So please keep me posted. The eligibility of over 3 years, and that's not in our gift. That's, again, we've got very clear guidelines. Again, we're moving fast in this situation. Who's to say that won't change? I don't know. It's not in our gift. And yes, absolutely, there's great people coming through with professions that we need. We've seen that in the Afghan scheme as well, neurosurgeon, all sorts of things. Again, I think, yes, we will be sensitive to that. And again, this is going to be a constant course correction. We don't know what's coming tomorrow. And sadly, the Ukrainians have a terrible feeling of what's going to be coming tomorrow, and it's worse than yesterday.
Thank you, David. Well, that's been a really useful discussion, and really update, good exchange of information. I've learned more through that. Does anybody have any other comments or questions that they want to raise on this one? No? In which case, the recommendation is simply to note the content of the report. Can I just ask you to confirm your agreement, please, to the recommendation? Agreed? Thank you very much. Takes us on to our last item. This is the Towns Fund, 35 to 45 Abingdon Street. Now, members will know that there are pink papers, which are confidential papers, which are shared only with members. And it's a relatively rare thing to do, but it's done simply when there is information shared with members that the disclosure of which could put the public purse at risk of not getting best value. So we don't do that lightly. What that therefore means is we would suggest that we have the discussion, and we have some speakers on this, and we'll keep as much of that public. However, if any member does have questions regarding information that's on the pink confidential paper, we will then move into private session, which requires us to ask press and public to leave. So if we can proceed on that basis, there'll be plenty of opportunity. I don't mind going to private session so the members have had the chance, but it may be you've studied that, and it would also be helpful, particularly if anybody's watching on YouTube, for them to hear as full a debate on this as they could, if that's okay. So if I may, I'll start off by asking Lizzie just to introduce the paper to us. Lizzie, over to you.
Yep, thank you. Can you all hear me? Yeah. So this is the business case and delivery strategy. Just as a quick reminder, it's the former BHS site, which is privately owned, at the M&S site, which is owned freehold by West Northants Council, and a derelict office property at the rear on Wood Street, and that's owned by Legal and General. So as a cabinet, we are going to set the conditions to do two main tasks. As part of the funding allocated, as part of the town's fund for this report, is to draw down the 9.7 million to address the viability gap on the site. It's what's called enabling monies to ensure that we can move forward by demolishing and rebuilding that area. Otherwise, this site wouldn't be commercially viable to a developer, and a main part of the town centre would decline even further. So it is something that is used throughout the UK in these sorts of situations. So the total build cost, and this isn't something that is private, but you're talking about 60, 70 million pounds for this particular site. Obviously, it'll have to go to procurement, and so the exact figure won't be known, and obviously we won't be discussing that today. The report also details the proposed route of delivery for the scheme, including the acquisitions required once the funding is in place. So the recommendations set under 3.1 sets out the decisions that are needed to do this, and which I will go through specifically at the end. Within the report, the process for the approval of the outline business case is set out by Cushman and Wakefield's report, which is here, this great big meaty document, which is in the pink papers. I don't know whether anybody's had chance to read that, but it is very detailed indeed. And also the Hatch, being the appointed independent appraiser, who is carrying out all appraisals for this fund, so all the different projects. The business case has been approved by the Northampton Forward Oversight and Delivery Group on the 14th of February 2022. I sit on that, so does SEMLEP, so do the university, and so do some other businesses within the town. In addition to that, we have a political subgroup, which I also sit on, which is a cross-party subgroup, which has this information in advance and can communicate their views on that. And then finally, the Northampton Forward Board approved this on the 23rd of February 2022, and I also sit on that. I say all of this to show you the depths of the rigour that go into making the decision before it actually comes to cabinet, not to mention the masses of work carried out beforehand by officers and external consultants. This is a very, very in-depth analysis. So just as a reminder, the Northampton Forward Board is coordinated by West Northants Council, but it is a public-private sector partnership, and that is where the main decision-making lies. So the Northampton Forward Board is made up of SEMLEP, the university, businesses, manufacturers, the theatre, the police, BID, the Grosvenor Centre, currently owned by Legal and General. And this group is the sovereign decision maker for this decision, as far as the government is concerned. The chair of that board is the chief executive of Tricker's Shoes. So cabinet is not actually a requirement of this government process, but one that we as an authority have decided to orchestrate in order to ensure that there is full and final consultation on such an important decision for our town. Given the scale of the project, the report sets out a summary of the business case ahead of moving on to the procurement and the delivery strategy, which sets out the next steps once the funds have been drawn down. This will include taking the site to market to seek a development partner with draft objectives for this procurement set out under 5.42 of your white paper. 2 sites are required to be acquired by the council to enable this development to come forward, with funding for these acquisitions included within the grant. And that is 35 to 39 Abington Street and 20 to 28 Wood Street, which is the derelict office property behind. This is important. If the agreement to purchase these sites cannot be made, then provision for bringing a report at a later date has been included. And that should include a future CPO, a compulsory purchase order. And if you go to section 5.5 in this, it details how the compulsory purchase order would take place. Naturally, we hope that that will not have to happen, but we feel it's important that we highlight that tonight. The money for both the remediation and any subsidy has been accounted for within the grant. At the moment, the development appraisal is showing that the site could require more than the 0.7 that we've allocated. However, it's Cushman's view that we will be able to come to some solution on that. And this view is endorsed by Hatch and indeed our senior regen team. In terms of costs of running both the complex procurement process and the holding costs for building that will be required, these will be met by the Townsend Revenue Fund that the council has received. So in essence, the plan is to build 342 1, 2 and 3 bedroom apartments in 3 blocks. You will need to go to your pink papers for the full details on those, but these will come to market in a managed process, i.e. not all at once. Those units will be a combination of sale and also build to rent block as well. This will be a mixed use development with ground floor retail and residential above. 5+ architects have designed the layout as per page 8, again in your pink papers, which I won't go into now. Sustainability of build is a key part of the process in terms of how we choose our developer for this contract. Rob Saunders is the appointed key project manager who has a strong record of success elsewhere within Northamptonshire, particularly with the cinema at Daventry. So I will now draw your attention to 3.1 of the papers. It is recommended that Cabinet approve the outline business case for the 35 to 45 Abington Street project to draw down 9.7 million of Towns Fund funding. That Cabinet approves the procurement and delivery strategy as an Appendix B that sets out the recommended delivery route for 35 to 45 Abington Street, which recommends using a form of development agreement to deliver the project, which will be quicker. Cabinet also authorises the purchase of each of the 35 to 39 Abington Street and the 20 to 28 Wood Street, in each case subject to a red book valuation and satisfactory due diligence on the site. A resultant acquisition being made at no more than a fair commercial price, taking account of all relevant factors. That Cabinet confirms it is willing in principle to exercise its compulsory purchase power to facilitate the development if absolutely necessary, and that Cabinet notes a further Cabinet report would be brought back upon the completion of the procurement process to seek approval for the preferred bidder. So I hope you're all very excited by this proposal and prospect. It seems quite complicated, I know, but it isn't to those that are experts in the field. It's very exciting because it's the next stage of our town centre regeneration, which we all know is absolutely needed. So I would all hope that you would be endorsing these
Lovely.
Papers today.
Thank you, Lizzie. But it is a proper bit of regeneration, isn't it? And a prime
bit.
part of town. Really exciting to see it moving ahead. Yeah.
Meaty bit.
We have a couple of speakers on this. That's Councillor Emma Roberts, then Councillor Sally Beardsworth. Emma, over to you.
Thank you. And I think we all welcome regeneration of the town centre in almost all forms, dare I say, because we've obviously seen a significant decline over the last few years. But the more and more I read this report, the more and more I was concerned that £9.7 million is being spent on funding somebody else's project. And there was not a how can I put it? I wasn't clear on what we were getting back if something went wrong. And the risks were aligned in the report of the overspends, the potential revenue access needed. But if the market decides that this initial proposal isn't attractive, and it's not attractive to the marketplace because the report says that it might be, but further testing is needed, we could have taken £9.7 million and flushed it right down one of those drains that are blocked in my ward. It feels that when you read the report, the market decides the strategy. The market decides how we run this strategy, but it's actually the market that's put our town centre in this position in the first place. There's one bed apartments, or there's no family living detailed. There's no talk of affordable housing in any guise that I can see. How much of it will be affordable if we know, if we have any detail, it may well be that, as I say, because the 9.7 million is actually spent on getting us to that phase, you don't have any of that detail at the moment. I wondered whether or not there'd been any assessment as to whether infrastructure upgrades were needed and whether we were going to be responsible for those costs in addition from the revenue budget or any other form of budget. It feels like we were spending our grant money so that some developer could come along and make loads more money out of it on top. And I don't mean to be negative, but I feel like those questions aren't asked or answered by the report. Welcome the regeneration, can see the amount of work that the officers are doing, but I'm just really fearful of the wastage of that fund. Thank you.
Lizzie and Stuart may well comment on these items. I would just say this is public intervention. Accept your comments about the market. This is not a market viable site, and at the current time to say rescue, but to move forward town centres, public and government and councils need to invest, and that's what this is really. But you know, government always want BCRs, benefits cost ratios on all projects, even roads where villages need bypasses. With examples, you can't do it unless they make a profit. In other words, bring houses. So this is exactly that really. That's an overriding comment, but Lizzie, you might or Stuart might want to make particular relevant comments.
Yeah, no, I'll comment, and I'm sure Stuart would also probably like to comment as well. So, I mean, market decides strategy. Well, it's what the market wants. It will afford. Okay, so here, the do nothing is not an option, because if we don't intervene, we will not get this as an enabler to other development within the town centre. Affordable housing, we have a strategy for affordable housing, but it's all about a mix in different areas. There is already a lot of affordable housing plans going on, but we will not exclude affordable housing in the future from the town centre. But it has to be a mix in terms of bringing in and modifying the demographics so that we have that cross-section of the community that's using the town centre. There will be an opportunity for buy to rent. In terms of infrastructure upgrade, well, this will be looked alongside the infrastructure strategy for the town centre, and also the transport strategy for the town centre, and indeed many other strategies for the town centre. So it's not going to be looked at in isolation, okay? Because you're right, the infrastructure, there does need improvements to the infrastructure. There needs to be an infrastructure to the transport structure as well, and that includes both buses, but also how the cars navigate around the town, etc. Jonathan has talked about BCR, and that's very important. But the BCR report here in the pink papers, what it doesn't do is it doesn't highlight the effects of this development on the rest of the town, and in terms of its attraction to other developers to go into other areas as well. The fact of the matter is that without the 9.7 million, this development would not happen. But the contracts that go out to tender will accommodate the fact that we have enabled this site to bring it out to tender. But this is probably an area where you would like to intervene now and actually say your piece, I'm sure, to explain it even further. I'm comfortable with the process.
Thanks, Lizzie. Chair, again, I think Lizzie's identified the key aspects there, and certainly the report, I think, does spell out where we are in this process. I think I'd probably like to pick up 2 points to add to what Lizzie identified. First, the monies and the grant was given specifically for this purpose. So had we not put in this particular scheme, which was then assessed by government, again, we wouldn't have the £9.7 million to actually spend in the first place. So like many other town centres, one of the key issues here is we've got too much retail. And the two big blocks, BHS and Marks and Spencer's, obviously is not a footprint that we will see come back to the market in any form. So therefore, I think it's right and proper we take out those two big units and we work with the market. And I think that's emphasising my second point, working with the market, not giving it to the market to then deal with. So the development agreement and or the joint venture, which is identified as the preferred option, is really about sharing that risk and reward, but being clear about the council's expectations and red lines about what we want to see in there. So it will be the council that's setting the parameters in which we will be working, setting the design qualities, setting the expectations that this will be an outcome that gives to the town rather than gives to the market or to any profit as we go forward. So it's an early report from that point of view because we haven't gone to the market to look at that joint venture. So it's really saying let's buy it first, but we've got a plan for what we'll do next, and that is that joint venture partnership with a developer who has the skills, the expertise, etc., that can help us fulfill the ambitions that is set out in the strategy. So hopefully that helps Councillor Roberts in terms of the some of the dynamics there that you were mentioning, and that very firmly the council has a big part to play in this and a big say in what actually comes forward. It's not just the market taking this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Thanks, Emma. Final speaker on this is Councillor Beardsworth. Sally.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. We've got to do something with the town centre as it is. It's not working as it is. But I do have some concerns about the number of one-bed apartments. That they're very transitory one-bed apartments. People don't stay in them. They meet another person and move on. And it's 159 seems quite a large amount. What I want to know is what sustainability you're building into these apartments. Is that part of the bid? Are we going to have sustainability built into these places that for soundproofing and also for heat loss and all the other bits that we can do? Will there be solar panels on the roof? Those sort of things that you take for granted these days should be done with new developments. And you're talking about shops underneath. But we're finding it difficult getting shops underneath these days. We're getting difficulty to get shops at all. And the trouble is, as we all know, people buy online. You get a much faster selection. I like to still go in and shop. I'm old fashioned. I like to go and feel the fabric and all that sort of business. But a lot of youngsters don't want to do that. They just want to go online, buy an outfit, wear it for one day, and then it's in the corner of the room. It's, you know, we've got to make things more sustainable. And I don't know how you can do that, but I'm sure there are people out there far better qualified than me that can actually help us look at those sort of things. But I just feel, you know, you've only got 25 3-bed apartments in the whole of this complex. And if you're going to look at places as well, I think you've got to look for green spaces, maybe behind where the old bus station used to be. That would be make into a nice park if you could actually work out the road system around it. And I think that would be a really nice area for people who live in these apartments to have some recreation. I know they've got Beckett's Park, but it's quite a way away. So it's all those sort of things, and I'm sure you've covered a lot of them, and we have looked at them when we've been talking about them before. But it's such a huge project, and we've got to get it right. We can't afford to make mistakes. And I just feel that so in some respects, I think the mix maybe should be looked at when we get the developer on board and see what they think as well, what is feasible for them. But sustainability must be built in.
Jolly good. Thank you, Sally. Some points to note there, I think. Was there any comment you want to come back with at all?
Well, I did mention about sustainability actually when I
Yes, you
went
did.
through it. Yeah, will be one of the key criteria in the selection of the partner. In terms of the shops, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, but small bespoke shops are different to your big high street chains, but it's not just shops, and maybe I didn't make that clear, restaurants, cafes, but you know, it's that sort of cafe culture that we're trying to create. So it'll be a combination of those. In terms of the number of beds, Stuart, I'm sure will be able to answer this in more detail. I mean, obviously we haven't gone out to tender yet, so I think everything's still in the mix. This is what we've been advised by Cushman's and Hatch. I've obviously appraised this, but I think there's still some movability there. So I'd be quite interested in Stuart's view, because I think you're right, actually. And that's my gut feel, probably too. And in terms of the green space, completely agree. Funnily enough, we've had this discussion before. I mean, we will be introducing more vegetation and green space into the town centre, but I think we still need to do more so that we have these dwell tubs where people can enjoy it more. But we're still at the early stages of this journey, aren't we? And I think we're walking around a lot at the moment, discussing and cogitating, and I think, you know, we've got more to do in this area in terms of green space for sure, I'm sure. But Stuart, yeah, tell us about the bedrooms.
I think Lizzie's already answered the question, if I'm honest, is we've had to put a development appraisal forward, and that's based on the market as is of today, but there's still a lot of assessment to do. So if you look at the private rented sector as an example, Northampton doesn't have a private rented sector in the commercial sense of the word. So again, that is something that we are talking to people all the time about. Where are the gaps in our housing strategy, if you like? What is a balanced community for the town centre, and what does that look like? So whilst the appraisal almost takes from today point of view, and that's where the 1 bedroom, 2 bedroomed and 3 bedroomed apportionment comes from, we will very much about looking at future proofing it and looking at what's the best fit for the town centre as we move on. So absolutely concur with what you're saying there, Sally, and what Lizzie's already said in that regard. And again, if I can add, in terms of the range of shops, Lizzie and I did a walk around just a couple of weeks ago, and again, there are some areas that we're starting to see shops actually come back in. So we are starting to see a shift of that small independent shop unit actually starting to come back to the town, and there's a number of areas where we actually witnessed that, and again, it's good to see, but we need more of that, and again, we need more people in the town to actually make that more viable as well. So I think it is not looking at this in isolation, but looking at it as Lizzie has already said, in terms of the remit of the town and the opportunities of the town as we go forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Adam, you going to come in with a comment?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think Councillor Beardsworth's made a really valuable contribution to the debate. What I would just acknowledge is that if you look at European cities in particular, what you find is that in high density living accommodation, they create their own market. You know, you've got hundreds of apartments or flats above a group of commercial premises, and there's your market, and the commercial premises below will serve that market as well as more of the surrounding area. So I don't have too many concerns about the commercial units below the flats. What I would also say is that yes, we need to be extremely mindful of the housing mix. What I would encourage people not to overlook is the need for 1-bedroom apartments. They are valuable as starter homes, as first steps on the housing ladder, as affordable rented accommodation, and they serve an economic need in terms of getting people into our economy who may otherwise be priced out of living in our town centre. So absolutely need to find the balance in the numbers that Councillor Bowens recognised, but let's not ignore the need that we really have for smaller number of bedrooms in these sorts of living accommodations.
Jolly good. Thank you, Adam. I think that probably is all the comments on that one. If there are no further comments, no. Lizzie has already kindly taken us through the recommendations. which are at section 3. So if I may, I'm just going to ask you please to confirm your agreement to those recommendations. Agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much indeed. So that was our last agenda item. So may I thank all the officers for their work on the reports, for everybody for attending. Thank you very much indeed.